Poetry is an art form often left to the wordsmith, the helpless romantic, and the dandy, and is usually reserved for the topics of love and intimacy. So how could an art form so well known for dealing in these realms of love and pleasure provide the world with one of the greatest rivalries of all time? No, this is not the Hatfields and the McCoys feuding over blood and land. This is a rivalry that runs much deeper. This is a tale of classism, rich versus poor, the privileged versus the disenfranchised. This is a story of two English poets and the hatred and admiration that they shared for one another. Today on His and Hers History, we cover the epic rivalry of the famous scholars Byron and Keats.
Ooh, interesting.
Hello and welcome to His and Hers History. I'm your host Aaron and this is my co-host Stephanie.
Hello.
How are you?
Good.
Doing well?
Do you know where a dandy came from? The term
I was
dandy?
actually going to ask you that. I had to look it up myself.
I do know that.
What is it then?
Well,
Regale
I believe
us.
I know that.
Yep.
So a dandy was like a rich person that travelled around and was quite, worldly.
Well-to-do.
So it's like now backpackers when they come back.
Oh no.
And
I don't think...
all they talk about is like, I was in Paris and I got a baguette under the Eiffel Tower and it was so much better than anything else. And they talk about their experiences, and that's where the term Yankee Doodle Dandy came from.
Well, there you go. I didn't know that personally. There you go. I'm just looking up the definition now. A man unduly concerned with looking stylish and fashionable.
Yeah, because they would have known the best fashions of the time, and they came back with them.
That's
People
right.
thought they were an utter idiot because they look stupid.
So
but
it's sort
they
of
were
like
just
how
wearing, the
backpackers
latest.
behave now when they come back. Not all of them, but they come back, oh yeah, I've travelled over here. And
Yeah.
this is like, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. Anyway, completely unrelated to poetry.
I
but
don't know. I just heard dandy and I got distracted.
I thought I'd throw it in there because it's great. Before I begin our podcast today, if you're new to this podcast, let me catch you up to speed. Each week, one of either myself or Steph bring a historical topic to the podcast, either a person, place, or event, and we present said historical topic. The only catch is the host presenting knows all the facts, and the host listening knows nothing at all. By doing this, we can have a lighthearted look at the past with genuine reactions, and anyone who's listening, can have a laugh along with us as we dissect and potentially ruin history.
Anyone who can listen.
Anyone who can listen, sorry to the people who are hearing impaired. Podcasts probably aren't for you. But I'm sure there's podcasts out there for people like
Well,
that.
they can listen on YouTube with the closed captions.
Oh, they can too. That's right. Which we do provide on YouTube. So I said in our little intro there that the host presenting knows all the facts and the host listening knows nothing at all. But at the end of last week's episode, when I alluded to what I was covering, you said you knew a bit about
I've
Lord
heard
Byron.
about both of them.
you've heard
I know
about them.
about a bit more about Byron, but
Yeah.
I probably don't know about these feuds. So
Yeah, so, well...
I'm excited to
When I
hear
was looking
about
into it, I was like, a feud between poets seems really strange because they're normally, academic people and they love the art. So you'd assume they love someone else's interpretation of something like that. But it turns out they didn't really like each other that much, and we'll get into that. Now, this episode, I've done my own poetry in honour of Byron and Keats. So please have some tissues close handy, especially for you, Steph, because some of these are quite touching and they're going to make you cry, make you laugh,
Cry in
make you laugh,
or
and make you love. Poem number 1,
beautiful.
Opposites Attract. One was born rich, one was born poor, but both of their poetry did people adore. So rather than go through Byron and Keats' lives... What? No reaction from you? Oh,
There is a
that was really
reaction.
touching.
I'm laughing.
Not the reaction that I thought. Rather than go through Byron and Keats' lives from start to finish and cover their whole lives, I thought that's probably a bit boring and you could probably
I'm sure
find...
it's been done before.
Yeah, that's right. You could find it anywhere. I thought I'd just cover a bit of their childhood, give you a little bit of their background, so it gives you an idea of where they're coming from in this epic rivalry. Poem number 2, The Lord. Born into wealth and born into fame, he set out into the world to make his own name. George Gordon Noel Byron Baron VI, was born in London, England on the 2nd of January 1788. He was born to his parents, Catherine Gordon of Guyt, an impoverished Scots heiress, and his father, Captain John Mad Jack Byron. If your nickname is Mad Jack, you've probably done some things in your time to earn that. So
I would say so.
yeah, I'll touch on that in a second.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about it.
Although born into wealth and prestige, Byron had a less than ideal start to life. He was born with a club foot, in which he was mocked during his childhood, mostly by his mother, who was said to have raised young Lord Byron in an atmosphere, with a fierce temper and insensitivity, which you can agree doesn't sound like a nice way to grow up.
No.
But at least he had his mother there with him. His father was absent for the vast majority of his early childhood. He spent the bulk of his time wasting his wife's inheritance before running off to France with another woman on a whim and dying in 1791, just 3 years after his son was born. So he was a bit of a loose cannon, his father, and he had nothing really to do with him, which is probably a good thing.
This seems to be a theme of a lot of our subjects in his and hers history, like Alfonso the other day.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
he had a odd relationship with his mother and his father was not present. And
there seems to be childhood trauma running through most of these stories.
Hey, it's what makes a great person, apparently.
Yeah, well, apparently a bit of, what is it? A bit of like a challenge in your childhood, you know, they branch out and they want to do better, potentially. Life, however, wasn't all that bad. After all, he was soon to become a lord. With the death of his great uncle, I couldn't find his name. I'm sure I could if I looked it up, but his nickname was the Wicked, 5th Lord Byron. So there's a theme running through the men in this family. The Lord Byron died in 1798. So George became the 6th Lord Byron, Baron of Rochdale, heir to Newstead Abbey. He was just 10 years of age. From 1801 to 1805, Lord Byron attended Harrow School, where he wrote verses and played sport with other young boys of a similar background. It is said that his deep love for his cousin Mary compelled him to take his first dabble into poetry. Such was his burning love. So he took on poetry because he loved his cousin. Not on.
You've got to get over the cousin love thing, Aaron.
It seemed very common back.
It was very
back in
common.
those times, yeah. Apparently during this time as well, he also dabbled with relations with boys, allegedly. So he was potentially bisexual, which I found interesting. From then on, the young Lord Byron turned his attention to history, writing and the Bible, a perfect outlet for a child with his upbringing. He showed great promise in these areas and showed a keen interest in developing skills. In November 1806, he distributed around Southwell his first book of poetry, entitled Fugitive Pieces, printed at his expense and features poems from his personal interactions during his time at Harrow School. His maybe his little play sessions with his mates.
Can't call it play session.
We'll move on. This was the start of a blossoming career as lord and a poetry legend. George had wild success throughout his career and made a name for himself. Made himself successful beyond his title as a lord. He was described as a flamboyant and handsome nobleman whose wit, charm, and ancestral title accorded him entry into the most elite circles of English society. His works made him somewhat of a celebrity, and he enjoyed many of the finer things in life as a result. Quite the life for someone who had already been gifted so much. Lord Byron's poems centred around romanticism, and he took inspiration from Alexander Pope, another famous poet from a generation before. As a major political and social satirist, is that how you say it? Satirist? I'm not sure. But he repeatedly denounced war, tyranny, and hypocrisy. He was an untiring champion of liberty, and although he covered a great many topics during his career, he never lost touch with these themes. And his best poetry dealt with things that he could see and what he could feel. Poem number 3, The Cockney. From the streets of the downtrodden, the sickly and poor, this young man's poetry did conquer and soar. How are you liking my poem?
That one was beautiful.
Do you like my poem?
That one's like a modern classic.
It's brilliant.
Are you going to let the listeners in to one of your own original poems?
Oh, about Gizmo.
Yeah,
that was
Gizmo
my
poem.
first foray into poetry. It was an instant classic. Steph didn't like it so much, but you know, hey, maybe I'll read it at the end of the episode. You never know. I probably won't though. So John Keats was born in London on the 31st of October in 1795. He was the eldest of 4 siblings to parents Thomas and Frances Jennings Keats. It is believed that John was born in his father-in-law's stable, although there is no direct evidence to back this up. But we'll stick with it because it works well with my narrative and it works well with the story.
Their names are a lot easier to pronounce, aren't they? They're
Yeah,
not as long-winded as...
Yeah, when you have like Lord, Baron, Byron, Sixth and all these, yeah, it's ridiculous. John Keats. It's pretty easy. So not much is known about Keats's early life. He was born in a poor family, although this is debated as his family had ownership over the stables, as I mentioned, and from the outside seemed fairly well off at times.
Well, yeah,
For the
he would
times,
have.
I should say.
I would say, sorry, they would have had to have some sort of
Yeah.
education, and education
and-
costs money, but still, obviously, not in as best of a place as Lord Byron was.
Yeah, that's right. Not in as high standing. And I'll talk about it later, but he starts to get an education in a presumably pretty good academy. So it obviously wasn't that bad. But I think people like to lean into the fact that he was poor. But I mean, maybe for the times he was considered poor for the area he's in. I'm not sure. At the age of 8, Keats began schooling at Enfield Academy. And that goes against the notion that he was from a poor family, because how could a family of low socioeconomic status be able to afford an academy for their child, which is sort of interesting. Although this should have been the bright and blossoming start to Keats's poetry life, which in some ways it was, is also the start of a series of unfortunate events that would follow Keats for the remainder of his short life. On the 15th of April 1804, just 1 year into Keats's academic career, his father fell off his horse while riding home and was seriously injured. His father passed away the very next day from these injuries, and the Keats family's lives were thrown into turmoil. Just 2 months later, Keats's mother had remarried, presumably for financial safety and survival. However, after the loss of the family stables and most of the inheritance, Keats's mother decided to up and leave her newly married husband and the rest of the Keats clan.
Oh.
Yeah, not great mothering right there. It would have been tough, but still not great. She returned in 1808, but she was said to be broken and ill. She died shortly after of tuberculosis in March 1809. John was 14 years old and was the oldest male left in the family. For the remainder of his short life, John Keats was said to be fiercely protective and loyal of his brothers and sister.
You keep saying short, such a spoiler warning.
Yeah,
Aaron.
well, you could look it up, but yes, his life, unfortunately, is very, very short.
Oh, sad.
And we'll talk more about that later. His most well-known and widely loved poetry stems from his individual experiences and his human suffering, drawing from his own sadness and loss, which is a bit sad, but that's not all he did. He did other things as well.
Content.
Yeah, that's it. Content. Here's some content. Open wide. John Keats was seen as a poor and struggling middle-class poet whose work was routinely savaged, not for its supposed lack of quality, but simply for the fact that he was not of noble birth. And the art of poetry and the wordsmith should have been left to these men and not to, and I quote from Lord Baron Byron himself, a cockney poet. The stage is set for an epic poetry rival. So already there's a dig there. Through learning about their childhoods, we can see that although they came from different backgrounds, their early lives are an eerie reverse mirror of one another's. Baron Byron had a tumultuous start to his early life before things settled down and his life became relatively easy and pleasurable. While John Keats's life began with him being happy and content, and was soon turned upside down, and the remainder of his life was a constant struggle. So it's sort of weird that different backgrounds, yet they sort of started opposite and sort of flipped. Sort of weird. And you would have think, having known one another, that they might have seen maybe some similarities between, or maybe they didn't know.
They were probably so far removed from each other that they couldn't see any similarities.
Yeah, that's right. They're probably just like, I'm from this place, you're from that place. We're too different. We can't possibly get along.
Yeah.
Poem number 4, The Rivalry. Lord Byron, you have the floor. Mr. Keats, your poems are derivative, simple and poor. You leave all the readers yawning from bore. Mr. Keats, your rebuttal. Lord Byron, your poems are outdated, ancient and stale, just like your love of Cousin Mary, who you so fondly regale. Get absolutely wrecked. They are real poems from the time.
Ah, damn.
No, they're not.
They're not?
No, they're not. I just made them up.
Okay. We've got to stop this right now, Aaron, because you've got to write the next Hamilton.
That was pretty good, wasn't it?
It was
That's
very
not bad.
good.
I'll quickly go through it again. So, Lord Byron.
Oh, so now he's got
I'm not going to go through it again. That'll spoil it. But that's pretty good, I thought.
That was, you know what? We talked about your gizmo poem. I believe the word I used was basic.
Yes.
My review. That was very good. I appreciate
Thank you.
that.
It's very similar to my earlier works, Gizmo the Cardigan Corgi. But yeah, get absolutely wrecked. Now, you can probably tell from this poem that I've written that I may be siding with Mr. Keats in this
You
storyline.
usually side for the underdog.
I usually pick a side, yeah, and it's usually the underdog. But as the story goes on, you'll probably you'll see why. Maybe it's pretty easy to go with Mr. Keats. Byron and Keats's rivalry from the outside looked simple enough. An upper-class snob looking down on a commoner, judging his work to be just that, as common, and not worth anyone's time. So like, you're basic, boy, you're basic. That's what Lord was like. Yeah, that's what he's saying.
That's what Lord was.
Yeah, that's Lord, but you're basic. That's what he's saying. Whereas Keats looked down on Byron as a poet stuck in the past and getting by on his wealth and title and viewed him as someone out of touch. So he was like, you're old, man. You're old. I'm making this like a rap diss battle thing.
This is awful.
Sad.
Stick to your
I was like, Steph will love this.
original poem.
I'll stick to my poetry, my epic poetry.
Mildly racist?
What?
Your voices?
Oh, the accents have nothing. I was just, maybe, is it?
Yeah.
I apologise if it is. I didn't mean that at all. Sorry, I'll do it again. You're basic.
That's
There you
better.
go, British.
Yeah.
And because he's a Cockney, Keats is a Cockney, he's like, your work's derivative, mate. It's like old.
That's much
That's not
better.
bad,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
We'll edit that first part out. So earlier I quoted Lord Byron, who thought of Keats as nothing but a Cockney poet who didn't belong in the same hemisphere, let alone the same line of work. It was a classist type of snobbery as old as time. Byron simply didn't like Keats because he was not from a noble background. But Keats also had his own prejudices, although it would seem that they are far more justified than Lord Byron's. When reading a review of one of Lord Byron's works, Keats stated to a friend, "You see what it is to be 6 foot tall and a lord?" Why is it? That was oddly sensual. That was weird. You see you see what it is to be 6 foot tall and a lord. Keats had the belief that the only reason Byron had any success at all was because he was an aristocrat. He was aristocrat. He was an aristocrat. Aristocrat, sorry.
Yes.
That catered to an undemanding audience that would love his work regardless of its quality. I read through this several times too this week, making sure.
Words are hard, Aaron.
They are. You heard my poetry. I'm a master of words. I'm a wordsmith and a dandy.
Just getting them out is a bit
Say I'm a dandy, please.
No.
Oh, sad. However, it would be too simple to claim that this rivalry was only class-based. It ran much deeper than that. Both poets believed one another's works were inferior because of their differing styles. Lord Baron Byron loved and revered poetry from the 18th century Augustan poets, the poetry style that flourished during the reign of Caesar Augustus as Emperor of Rome. Alexander Pope was one of those I mentioned. He's another famous poet. These influences reverberated through Byron's works as he stuck with the classical Augustan style of poetry. However, it is noted that he did stray from this style slightly, especially in his later years. Keats, on the other hand, disliked the Augustan style of poetry, so much so that he wrote the poem Sleep and Poetry, which was critical of the Augustan style of poetry, which Byron fiercely disagreed with. And I would read the poem, but it's quite long and it's actually really difficult to read. I already have trouble reading things I've written down, let alone poetry from the late 1700s, early 1800s. It's really long and difficult to read. But basically, this poem is a diss track towards that style of poetry, which just so happens to be Lord Byron's favourite style. Now, I don't know if he did this poem as a diss towards all those poets or towards it. It feels like to me he sort of did it as a up yours to Byron, like your style sucks. So Keats' style of poetry was based around extravagant wordplay of the 16th century, and his most notable influences included Wordsworth and Coleridge, both of which helped to launch the Romantic Age in English literature with their joint publications of lyrical ballads. So basically, Lord Byron was still in the disco era, and he was breaking out all the old classic disco bass lines, while John Keats was punk rock scene that was forming and making its way up the charts. This added another element to their already staunch rivalry. They had completely different styles of writing, and both had a dislike for one another's influences. To put it simply, they disliked one another's poetry on an aesthetic level.
They had artistic differences.
So they're from artistic differences. You'd call it more than that. They're from different backgrounds and they had different styles, and so they just hated one another for those reasons.
Why can't we all just get along?
It's kind of sad because, and I'll touch on that later, about they're both obviously talented, and especially in like art forms, you think that people can admire other people's talents and stuff like that, but they clearly didn't. And I'll touch on that a little bit more now. Although they had a clear dislike for one another's work and lifestyles, it is worth noting that hatred and admiration are very closely linked when jealousy is at play. It could be quite possible that both men were jealous of one another for the same reason. They were both supremely talented, and have to share the limelight with someone could cause some unrest. It is no secret that both men would often read one another's poetry and make comments on its faults, as well as reading their reviews in the paper. Why would anyone do this unless they secretly admired the talents and couldn't bring themselves to admit that they had an equal in their field? So they were sort of obsessed with one another in a way and one another's work. And I don't know about you, if I don't like someone or something, I generally don't have anything to do with it.
I think that's your personality though.
Yeah,
I think
but
there are lots of people that like to watch someone they hate fail.
Oh, there's that about it too, but I think they were maybe sort of jealous of one another, or like, I'm the big dog, you're the little dog sort of thing. While it's clear from the outside that both men did indeed dislike one another, it is just as clear to see that they were obsessed with one another's work, as I mentioned. John Keats wrote a letter to his brother George in September 1819, addressing the comparison made about him and Lord Byron. You speak of Lord Byron and me. There is a great difference between us. He describes what he sees. I describe what I imagine. Mine is the harder task. I mean, Mr. Keats, you are throwing some serious shade right there. He's basically saying that, like, Lord Byron's like, oh, look, a chair.
Yeah.
And, like, writes about where he uses his imagination and his creativity and stuff like that, which I love that. He's just like, you suck. It's like old-timey dissing one another. I love it. So John Keats felt his poetry was far more complex and in a different league to Lord Byron's. Lord Byron also had his fair share to say about Keats's work also. Lord Byron wrote a letter on the 18th of November, 1820, shortly after Keats's death, to John Murray, who was the 4th Duke of Atholl, a wealthy friend of the Barons. Obviously, he wouldn't be writing to anyone else unless they were wealthy. The letter writes...
I heard the
letter writes. Now, this is a sort of lengthy letter, so I'm probably going to...
And the letter writes or the letter reads?
Yeah, letter reads probably makes more sense than the letter writes, because it's not writing itself, you're reading it.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
Okay.
P.S. Of the praise of that little dirty blackguard, Keats, in the Edinburgh's a paper, I shall observe as Johnson did when Sheridan the actor got a pension. What, has he got a pension? Then it is time I should give up mine. Nobody could be prouder of the praise of the Edinburgh than I was, or more alive to their censor, as I showed in EB and SR. Got no idea what that means. At present, all the men that have ever praised are degraded by that insane article. Why don't they review and praise Solomon's Guide to Health? It is a better sense, as much poetry as Johnny Keats. So that's quite a bit to take in. It's sort of hard to interpret. I had to read it a couple of times to figure it out. But basically, he disliked the fact that the paper wrote a good review about one of Keats's works. And it's worth noting that a lot of what Lord Byron has to say about Keats happens after Keats dies. So dog act. Yeah. That's a low blow. Like it
is
punching down. He waits till he's dead to have a full go at him.
Sad.
Yeah, it is sad. In another letter to John Murray, Byron wrote, now I'm starting to think John Murray, nothing wrong with the relationship that they had, but were they more than friends? Because he's writing lots of letters to him. They're probably just mates. John Keats, who was killed off by one critique, just as he had really promised something great. Nice of him to say, I'll just cut in, nice of him to say after he's dead, when he'll never read this. So he's like showing humility, like, yeah, he's okay. He's dead. I don't like Lord Byron if you haven't gathered.
Tell,
yeah, so as he had promised something great, if not intelligible, without Greek, contrived to talk about the gods of late, much as they might have been supposed to speak. Poor fellow, he was an untoward fate. 'Tis strange the mind that very feely particle doesn't make sense.
The very feely particle.
Yeah, the very feely particle should let itself be snuffed out by an article. So, in a sense, Byron had the last laugh. as I said before, he wrote
Literally.
Yeah, literally.
Survived longer. So.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, he literally got the last laugh. So, as I mentioned before, he wrote this letter shortly after Keats's early death at the age of 25. Unfortunate, rather than taking the high road, he just makes the fun of the facts that Keats is dead and implies that he died as a result of a bad review from one of his poems.
Ooh.
So, yeah, dog
That's
act.
savage.
Yeah, that is like, in poetry terms, that's probably the most savage thing you could do. Like, oh, you died from one of your critiques, you poor fellow. It's also worth noting that Byron wrote several letters over the coming years about Keats's work to others. Potentially Keats had the last laugh, though, as he died amidst producing some of his greatest poems. And with him dying, left him on top, and poor Byron was left without motivation. The motivation, he needed to produce more great poems. Mm. So what do you think it says about Lord Byron, the fact that he wrote several letters after Keats had died about his work, like over several years? Do you think
obsessed.
Maybe someone missed him? Maybe
it was that thing that pushed him
that's
to
right.
be great.
Yeah. And that's what I thought. Did it push him to be great? Or maybe he secretly, as I said, was jealous or actually liked him because he kept writing letters about him. And on the website, I'll leave it in the references, there's heaps of letters he wrote about him. He was like borderline obsessed with him. So it's like, I don't think you actually hated him all that much. I reckon you quite admired him secretly. But that's in the eye of the beholder. Poem number 5, A Life Cut Short. Poem number 5, A Life Cut Short. From humble beginnings this rose hath grown, only to be cut down before his seeds were sown. Beautiful, that was. That was a poem by one of Keats's admirers from the time.
Stunning. From the time.
Yeah. No, it was me.
Amazing.
John Keats passed away at the young age of 25. He succumbed to the same illness that claimed his mother, tuberculosis. He wrote only a small amount of poems, only 54 poems in total. However, he left a legacy that is still talked about today. He was experimental, and his love of wordplay endeared him to poetry fans. Although only around for a short time, he led one of the more unique and fascinating lives of a poet, and was truly unique. Shortly before falling ill, Keats wrote a letter to his sister Fanny. Within this letter, he wrote the phrase, "I have loved the principle of beauty in all things, and if I had had time, I would have made myself remembered." He died just a month later.
That's a beautiful
when I read that,
sentence.
I was like, wow. But it's kind of sad because it sounds like he's saying, I didn't get enough time to write my works and be remembered. But he is remembered. But maybe at the times people were so savage towards his work because he was a Cockney, he didn't feel the love. And yeah, maybe the love came after he died centuries later. Poem number 6, A Life of Luxury. Life is not fair, it is cruel and unkind. Why couldn't Lord Byron appreciate Keats's mind? That was another one.
I can tell that's an original, yes.
That's not one of my better ones.
That one's in the league of the Gizmo poem, yes.
I disagree strongly with you. I'm going to have a poem off with you later and obliterate you. I'll be Keats, you'll be Byron.
That was very aggressive.
Yeah, well, you're dissing my poetry. You like some of it, but you're dissing. I'm going to have a poem off with you, and you're going to be left
I've never
cowering
said
in
I'm
the corner.
a poet. I've never claimed this.
You're going to be left cowering in the corner after I defeat you in the art of poetry, in the dandy.
Art of poetry.
The art of poetry and the dandy. So that poem's obviously about Lord Byron. Lord Byron passed away only a few years after Keats in 1814. After dabbling in politics and military, it's ironic that he fell ill as well, suffering from bloodletting. He partially recovered, however, caught a bad cold after the doctors operated on him with therapeutic bleeding. He fell into sepsis and contracted a violent fever and passed away shortly after. So I didn't want to cover his politics and military thing, but there was something in there that he led a military battalion or something like that with little to no experience. And if he had have won, he would have become the king of Greece or something. So there's a whole other story. I was like, what?
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, but I was like, I can't cover that.
I need to learn about this.
You could potentially learn about that. Lord Byron captured his life in one of his last ever poems, Canto 4. But I have lived, and I have not lived in vain. My mind may lose its force, my blood its fire, and my frame perish even in conquering pain. But there is that within me which shall tire, torture and time and breath when I expire. So from like their last, like Keats' last letter and one of Byron's last poems, they're clearly both talented and amazing writers. It's a shame that they didn't see it for one another. Maybe God saw it fit to take Byron shortly after Keats, as he knew that they belonged together, for better or for worse, and he wanted to renew the rivalry up in heaven, potentially.
Goodness.
If you're religious, that's the way you could look at it. All in all, both men disliked each other a great deal and came from vastly different backgrounds. That is clear. But I think it's safe to say that without one another lurking over each other's shoulders, they may not have been driven to stick with their particular styles of poetry and produce the quality of work that they did. In a strange way, they needed each other, and oddly enough, they may have even admired one another, if it weren't for the life and times that they were born in. And so that is the tale of Byron and Keats. So there's much more on the website that you can read about, but I thought I'd just give a little snapshot of their rivalry, and I thought it was interesting because they're poets, and poets are supposed to be nice, romantic people. What are your thoughts?
I was very interested. I think they definitely needed one another almost, didn't they? To push them.
And that's what they say, like when they talk about sport or other things as well. A champion is often driven by another champion. Like they reach heights that they may not be able to reach had it not been for their opponent. And I like to think that I reckon they may have liked one another's work, and that came in the form of jealousy. So they're like, oh, well, no, they're no good. But I don't know. They may have just genuinely hated one another. Wrap up. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of His and Hers History, as told in the His and Hers History way. You loved it, Steph?
Loved it. I thought it was very interesting. And
you love my poems?
There was one in there that was very promising, and I think that Hamilton idea needs to happen.
Yeah, well...
what should we... Let's spitball now. What should we call our musical about the two poets?
The Rose and the Thorn.
No.
That's usually about a man and woman. Surely the... I know, the Snob and the Cockney or something like that.
Okay, that's...
It'll be a comedy, comedy-driven.
Put that on the table. The Snob and the Cockney.
It
would draw people in.
It could work. It's probably worth noting that these poems that I came up with, literally a minute on each, if that. So that's not bad.
You can tell, yeah.
Whoa, savage diss. I shall engage you in poetry battle. So hopefully you found it fun. If you would like to listen to more episodes, you can find us at our website, hisandhershistory.podbean.com. The Podbean app, of course, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Musical/Audible. And as we mentioned earlier, we have a YouTube channel. So feel free to like, comment and follow our podcast on whatever platform suits you. Leave any feedback or ideas that you have for us, because we'd love to know what people think and what they like and how we can improve. Don't forget to share with your friends, family, work colleagues or anyone else that you think might find the podcast interesting. By doing this, we can help build our community and we can provide you with some more entertaining looks at a variety of historical topics. Now, as always, Steph, do you have a clue for next week's episode?
Well, just like always, we probably don't give clues anymore. We literally just tell you what
I'm just going to let me retype that to say, what's your episode about next week?
So we will be looking at strange animal experiments next week.
Oh, yes. I'm already there.
There's one that I'm very excited to share with you.
I kind of want to ask you about it. I'm right there. I'm actually a bit upset that I haven't picked that. That's an awesome topic. Because what did I covered like animals on trial.
You did, yes, and so that was very interesting.
Weird experiments on animals. People really mistreat animals. Anyway,
absolutely true.
Can't wait. That should be fun.
I can't wait.
I'll finish with a poem just to finish it off.
I can't wait.
It's worth noting I literally wrote this while we're doing our little outro here. My poem's Steph doth not rate. It is my talent that she doth hate. Amazing talent. That was done in 10 seconds, literally. That's pretty good. And on that note, I think we'll say goodbye.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Catch you next week. See ya.
Bye.